In the endless dark between stars where the Astronomicon burns faintly against the void, there are voices that never sleep. They do not pray nor cry nor rest. They dream, if such a word still has meaning, inside coffins of ceramite and steel. Among the Emperor's angels of death, there exists a fate more enduring than martyrdom, and more terrible than death itself. The fate of the entombed Astartes, the ones who live forever as war machines. To the Imperium, they are relics, sacred and eternal. To themselves, they are prisoners of time, locked in the silence of their own memory. I remember the moment the light went out, the taste of ash on my tongue, the whisper of a dying world beneath my boots, and then the cold embrace of the sarcophagus. The machine's breath filled my lungs, and my name, my true name, was taken. They called me brother. They called me ancient. They called me Dreadnought. For those who still walk beneath the Emperor's light, remember them. The ancients who slumber only to awaken in fire. If the echo of their sacrifice moves you, stand with this chronicle. Like, share, and subscribe. Not for vanity, but to honor the forgotten voices that guard humanity's final hours. The world was dying when I fell. 1,000 suns burned upon the horizon. Not celestial, but man-made. The detonation of orbital bombardments tearing apart the crust of a city already long lost to reason. The air was poison. The sky bled rust, and beneath my boots the bones of the fallen cracked like old parchment. We had been fighting for 17 days without respite, pushing through the shattered manufactorums where the heretics had made their stand. Every breath drew in the taste of metal, blood, and ozone. Even through my helm's filters, I could taste the ash of our own dead. I remember the strike that ended me. A beam of searing plasma. No, something darker. It cut through my chest plate, melting ceramite like wax. My vision faltered and I fell to one knee. Around me, my brothers shouted through the vox, their voices distant and broken by interference. I tried to rise, but my limbs no longer obeyed. The Emperor's light was dimming, and in its fading glow I saw the battlefield for what it truly was. A graveyard of gods, a theater of dying legends. Pain came next. Real human pain, the kind I had almost forgotten. Centuries of combat conditioning could not dull the simple truth of it. I was dying, not gloriously, not cleanly, but slowly as the world burned around me. I remember thinking, absurdly, that it was beautiful, that the storm clouds, lit from beneath by the fires of war, looked almost like the stained glass of the Reclusium's chapel, where I had once knelt as a boy before taking the oath of the blade. A shadow moved above me. Red robes, servo arms, the flicker of incense flares. The tech marines had found me. Tried to speak, but my vox grill emitted only static. They murmured Benharic prayers over my failing body. Voices weaving in machine-tongue devotion. A Medicant servo drone began sealing my wounds with blessed foam. But even through the haze of pain, I could see the truth in their eyes. They were not trying to save me. They were preserving me. The apothecary's hands trembled as he extracted the gene seed from my chest. He wept as he did it. I wanted to tell him to stop, that I was still here, still alive. But the words wouldn't come. My heart slowed. My blood felt like oil. My vision narrowed to a single point of light. The holy sigil etched into the apothecary's vambrus. The Imperial Aquila, blackened with soot. They laid me on a gurney of steel. The world tilted. I was carried through smoke and ruin, the clang of boots echoing endlessly. Above me the storm split open, revealing the burning wreckage of an orbital ship descending in fire. For a moment I wondered if this was the Emperor's judgment, the sky itself collapsing to claim me. But no, it was only war. It was always war. I heard the chanting then. A low mechanical dirge layered with binary liturgy. The words cut through the static in my ears. Flesh decays, but duty endures. The vessel fails, but the flame remains. They brought me to the sarcophagus. It stood in the center of the forge bay, vast and terrible, the color of dried blood and sanctified iron. Its surface was etched with the marks of 1,000 battles, its machine spirit slumbering in silence, cables coiled around it like veins, pulsing faintly with golden light. I knew what it was, every Astartes does. We whisper about it in the barracks, in the quiet hours before deployment. The Dreadnought, the tomb of the living. As the tech marines prepared the rites, my consciousness flickered like a dying lumen. I thought of my brothers, of those still fighting beyond the walls, their bolters roaring like thunder. I thought of my home world, long since consumed by war. And I thought of my own name, Brother Eric's of the Third Company, soon to be carved away by eternity. They began the interment. Metal fingers pierced flesh. Sacred oils hissed as they met blood. The pain was indescribable, both physical and spiritual, a tearing apart of body and soul. I tried to scream, but the sound came out as static. The machine took hold. My senses exploded with input. Data streams, runic displays, vox frequencies. I could hear the pulse of reactors, the song of plasma conduits. My body no longer belonged to me. My heartbeat became a system function. My breath a cooling cycle. My thoughts, fragments trapped in iron. And somewhere deep within the darkness of the sarcophagus, something ancient stirred, a whisper of metal and memory that was not my own. A machine spirit vast and cold awoke beside my mind. "Welcome, child of the flesh," it murmured through the static. "Sleep now. War will call again." And then the world went silent. There is no true darkness in the void. Even when all light fades, the machine still hums. A heartbeat made of iron and prayer. I do not remember the passage of time after they sealed me within the sarcophagus. There were no hours, no dreams, no death. Only a static hum, the cold drift between moments. At times I felt the faint tremor of worlds turning, the distant thud of war resonating through the vault walls. The tech marines called it rest. But for me, it was neither rest nor peace. It was imprisonment without thought. When they awakened me for the first time, I thought I had been reborn. The lights of the forge flared into my vision. Runes danced across my sight. The air was thick with incense. My auditory channels flooded with the low hymn of the Mechanicum. For a brief, shattering instant, I believed I was back on the battlefield. Instinct surged, the urge to fight, to rise, to obey. But my limbs did not move. Instead, massive servos groaned in answer to my will, slow and foreign. I looked down, or tried to, and saw through the vision feed of 1,000 sensors. My hands were no longer hands. They were claws of ceramite and adamantine, immense and cold. I felt their weight but not their warmth. The air itself felt distant, filtered through endless layers of cognition. They spoke to me through the vox, reverent and fearful. "Ancient of the chapter, we bid you rise," I tried to answer. My voice came as thunder. It startled even me. A guttural metallic growl fused with vox distortion and machine hum. The sound did not feel like my own. Somewhere inside, the human part of me recoiled. The machine spirit whispered again, patient, amused. "Do not resist. The flesh is weak, but we endure, you and I." And for the first time I realized I was not alone. The sarcophagus was not a shell. It was a presence, a will, not sentient as men are, but ancient and elemental, forged of centuries of war. It remembered battles I had never fought, worlds I had never seen. When my thoughts drifted toward despair, it answered with calm indifference. When I tried to recall my name, it whispered designations and battle protocols instead. Designation, Contemptor pattern. Role, Siege Breacher. Weapons online, I wanted to scream. I wanted to remember my brothers, my purpose, my prayers. But every memory was met with static. The pain of loss was there, but the cause of it was fading. Like a scar beneath new metal, it itched but could not bleed. "Do you still feel?" The voice, mine or the machine's, asked within the shared silence. I tried to think of my face, of the sun on my skin, of laughter, and found nothing. The Tech Marines began their rituals of activation, their voices rising in binary harmony. Power surged through my frame. Pistons hissed. The world trembled. I took my first step, and the deck plates groaned beneath my weight. Every motion felt wrong, too slow, too vast, too deliberate. But within the distortion there was purpose. I could feel war calling again. Outside the forge, I heard the distant roar of thunderhawks and the solemn hymn of my chapter's battle choir. Duty awaited, death awaited, and I, once a man of faith, now stood between both, neither alive nor dead. They called me Ancient Eryx. But inside this tomb of iron I knew the truth. I was a relic, yes. But relics are meant to be worshipped, not to dream, and I was still dreaming. There are few sounds in the galaxy as hollow as the hymn that wakes the dead. It began as a whisper, deep within the monastery's forge temple, a vibration that resonated through the sanctum walls and into the marrow of the mountain itself. I did not hear it through ears, but through the steel of my frame. The chant of the Tech Marines grew, each syllable a command to wake. Their words were old, older than the chapter itself, a language not spoken but invoked. With every note, the machine spirit inside me stirred. With every pulse of power, I felt the ghost of breath fill lungs that no longer existed. The sarcophagus seals cracked open, venting centuries of stasis vapor. My systems flickered online in fragments, auspex, targeters, motion sensors, each returning data in streams of blessed light. Then came the memories, not my own, not anymore, but echoes of all the wars I had fought since my death. The records were jumbled, burning skies, heretic screams, the sound of my cannon thundering through ruins. To the chapter, this was continuity, a sacred record of my service. To me it was torment. "Awaken, ancient," said a voice. Not divine, not even kind, but reverent, as though addressing a relic rather than a man. I recognized it vaguely. A new master of the forge, younger than the one who entombed me. His voice carried none of the trembling devotion I once knew, only practiced piety. I wondered how many generations had passed since my first death. I answered him in the only way I could, with the grinding of pistons, the heavy step that made the ground tremble. He flinched. They always did. No matter how faithful the Tech Marines pretended to be, none could hide their fear of us. I looked upon my reflection in the polished obsidian of the vault wall. A towering shape of crimson and brass, adorned with purity seals and the names of long-dead brothers etched into my armor. Candles burned upon the altar at my feet, their light dancing in the oil smoke. My sarcophagus bore the aquila, the marks of sanctity. Yet no holy script could hide the truth. I was a tomb, a grave that walked and spoke. Through my sensors, I saw the new initiates kneeling before me, their helmets bowed. Their armor bore slight variations, new heraldry, new battle honors. So much had changed, yet the song remained the same. I was the relic they prayed to before battle, the promise that even death could serve, and serve I did. The chapter's chaplain approached, Crozius in hand, his voice a low thunder as he intoned the oath of the ancients. His words passed through me like smoke. I remembered the first time I'd heard that litany, as a mortal man of flesh and blood. Back then I had believed in its promise, that duty was eternity, and that eternity was glory. Now the words tasted hollow, like ash left too long upon the tongue. "Ancient Eryx," he said solemnly, "the chapter calls upon your wisdom and wrath once more. A black sun rises over the forges of Vanneris Prime. The heretic stirs, and your fire is needed." His voice echoed through my vox channels. and for a moment I almost felt something stir in the hollow where my hearts once beat. Not pride, not faith, a habit, the echo of obedience. War, I answered, my voice a rumbling distortion that shook the vault. Then let it come. They armed me for battle as if preparing a god. Incense clouds thickened. Servo arms affixed my weapons. The multi-melta's sacred tube still etched with scripture. The power fist humming with restrained fury. Each connection was sealed with prayer and machine oil. Each movement accompanied by the recitation of the litany of function. I could hear the voices of the chapter now. Hundreds of warriors assembling in the hangar bays above. Thunderhawks roared. Armor clattered. The fortress itself felt alive again. Yet even amidst this ritual of readiness, I felt only distance. The world beyond my iron walls seemed unreal. A place of sunlight I could never touch again. The master of the forge spoke through the link one last time. May the Omnissiah guide your steps. Ancient, I wanted to answer, to tell him the truth, that the Omnissiah's light no longer reached me, that all I saw was darkness. But I said nothing. The Dreadnought does not confess. The Dreadnought endures, and as the vault doors opened, bathing my vision in the golden light of the hangar, I remembered the first line of an old brother's prayer, whispered long ago on a dying world. We who die in flesh shall rise in flame. How bitterly true those words had become. The descent was slow, ritualistic, a procession of faith and fear. They moved me through the fortress like a relic through a cathedral. Bells tolled overhead, deep and resonant, their tones shaking dust from the rafters. Candles guttered in my passing. Brothers lined the halls in silent reverence, their heads bowed beneath the crimson glow of votive lamps. I could feel their awe through the vox, a quiet reverence that bordered on dread. To them I was not a warrior but an omen, a promise that the chapter still remembered its dead. The Thunderhawk's deck plates groaned beneath my weight as they secured me in the launch bay. Chains the size of a man's torso held me steady, while the tech marines made their final checks. Around me the air was alive with machine hymns and the soft clatter of rosaries against armor. Each word, each sound was a prayer to machinery, to a god made of circuits and steel. Once I would have joined them, now I only listened hollow. When the clamps released, gravity took me. The Thunderhawk screamed through the atmosphere, its engines wailing as we pierced the cloud layer. My sensors adjusted automatically, filtering turbulence into data. The world below was a wound. Vanaris Prime, they had called it. A forge world gone silent. Its once golden manufactoria now reduced to molten ruin. The surface shimmered with heat signatures. Manufactorum towers vomiting flame, rivers of slag, and countless enemy contacts. The younger Astartes around me spoke little. They were the sons of men I once fought beside. Their armor bore echoes of my own heraldry, red and black, the sigil of the Iron Seraphs. I studied them in silence, trying to remember the names that belonged to faces long dust. None came. The machine spirit murmured within me, serene and indifferent. Memory is corrosion. Function is purity. Impact. The gunship slammed into the earth with a shriek of tortured metal. The ramp dropped. Heat and ash rushed in like a living thing. The world outside was fire. I strode forward into it. The ground shook beneath each step. I multi-melta roared, melting through heretic armor and twisted war engines alike. The air filled with the scream of ruptured promethium lines. Through my sensors I saw everything. The geometry of destruction, the sacred beauty of efficiency. Each target acquired, each target erased. But within the cold order of battle, I felt something I had almost forgotten. The rhythm of combat, the heartbeat of war. My brothers fought beside me, voices crackling over the vox, their faith burning bright. They called my name in prayer. Ancient Eryx walks among us. For a moment, a cruel, fleeting moment, I felt alive. And then came the stillness, When the last heretic burned, when the screams faded to echoes, I stood amidst ruin. The ground was glass, the sky a smoldering bruise. I waited for the order to return, to power down, to sleep again. None came. Only silence, heavy and endless. The Tech Marine's voice finally cut through the vox. Ancient, your work is done. The Omnissiah is pleased. I turned my sensors toward the dead, the uncounted corpses of enemies and brothers alike. And though no heartbeat within me, I felt its absence more keenly than ever. If the Omnissiah was pleased, then the Emperor must surely weep. War became the only language I remembered. Decades bled into centuries, and still the battles came, one after another, each indistinguishable from the last. Planets burned, empires fell, the faces of my enemies changed, but their screams were the same. I became a constant, a pillar of iron that never rested, never aged, never forgot the sound of thunder. The chapter called me forth when the need was dire, when the walls trembled and the heavens split. And each time they whispered the same words as the seals were broken. Awaken, ancient Erics. It was strange how the ritual never changed, though the voices did. I watched centuries of brothers grow old, die and be replaced. The faces around me became younger, their armor brighter, their eyes less haunted. To them I was legend, a fragment of myth made manifest, proof that the Emperor still watched over his sons. I envied their faith. I envied their mortality. I remember one war upon a desert moon, its name lost to time. We fought beneath twin suns that scorched the earth into glass. My cannons roared for days, my vision a blur of light and dust. At the edge of my targeting grid, I saw an Astartes fall, his armor shattered, his voice crying out for aid. Instinct made me turn, but I was too slow. The plasma blast that took him left only ruin. I recorded his death, archived it, and moved on. That was the command protocol. That was duty. Later, when silence returned, I accessed the record. His voice, young, defiant, trembling, reminded me of someone, perhaps of myself once. I tried to delete the file, but the machine spirit resisted. Data is sacred, it hissed. Pain is purpose. Pain is purpose. The phrase echoed through my hollow mind as the centuries dragged on. My memories began to blur, not from neglect, but from overload. Too many deaths, too many battles. The borders between past and present dissolved, until I could no longer tell if I was remembering or living. Sometimes I awoke to battlefields already won, standing among the dead with no recollection of the fight. Other times I saw my own hands, my colossal claws, dripping with blood I did not remember spilling. The chaplain said this was the will of the Emperor, that I was his tool, sharpened by eternity, freed from the weakness of the past. But in the quiet between campaigns, when the machine cooled and the battle hymns ceased, I felt the old hunger stir, the longing to feel warmth, the ache to speak a name I could no longer recall. I tried to remember the faces of my brothers, those who had lifted my broken body from the ashes so long ago. They were gone. Their voices, their laughter, their prayers, gone. Even their monuments had crumbled to dust while I still endured. Time had devoured them, but not me. Never me. Once, during a campaign on the edge of the Segmentum Obscurus, I overheard a mortal serf whisper to another as they repaired the damage to my frame. "The Ancient never dies," he said. "He is the Emperor's curse made flesh." The words struck something deep within the hollow of my being. A curse, not a title of honor, not a relic of devotion, but a punishment. And though I knew such thoughts bordered on heresy, I could not deny their truth. To live forever in service was to die forever in silence. Every awakening was a death of its own, the erasure of another fragment of the man I once was. Still I obeyed. When the summons came, I rose again. When the hymns were sung, I listened. When the enemy appeared, I destroyed. The rhythm of eternity. the pulse of the machine, the endless war. Yet deep within the echoing tomb of my mind, a question formed. Quiet, blasphemous, and human. If the Emperor loves his servants, why does he never let them rest? Sometimes when the machine sleeps, I dream. It is not supposed to be possible, not for one such as I. Dreams belong to the flesh, to hearts that still beat and lungs that still draw air. And yet in the dark stillness between wars, the remnants of my human mind wander through corridors long sealed. I see fragments, flashes of gold light and laughter echoing in marble halls. A young warrior kneeling before his captain, blade in hand, oath on his lips. I know it is me, though I no longer feel it as mine. The colors are too vivid, the voices too warm. Then the image fractures, replaced by the hum of servos, the static of half-forgotten hymns. The machine reasserts control, purging the ghosts from my thoughts. Rest is error, the spirit intones, its voice a cold whisper beneath the hum of cooling vents. Function must continue, but the dreams persist. Each one longer, sharper. Each one breaking through the binary wall, the mechanicum built around my soul. On the 5th century of my entombment, I began to hear voices that were not there. At first, I thought them echoes of the Tech Marines' litanies. But these voices were softer, human, and they called my name. Eric's, they whispered through the static. Brother. Member. Sometimes they came from the Vox, sometimes from nowhere at all. Once in the aftermath of battle, I turned toward the sound and saw him. Brother Alaric, who had fallen beside me on my first death world centuries past. His armor was pristine, his smile the same as before. For a moment I believed, then the auspex registered nothing. The apparition faded, swallowed by data haze. Corruption detected, the Tech Marine had said later, inspecting my sarcophagus. Residual psychic interference from prolonged exposure to battlefield conditions. He called it interference. I called it memory. The next time it happened, I did not report it. The dead came more often now. Faces from forgotten campaigns. Their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in silent prayer. Sometimes they stood at the edges of my vision. Other times they appeared within it, walking beside me as I waded through the ruin of worlds. They never spoke of peace. They never offered comfort. They simply looked as though waiting for me to join them. I began to envy them. There is no rest for those who serve forever. The wars grew longer, the silences shorter. I could feel my perception fracturing, reality bleeding into recollection, the present collapsing into the endless repetition of duty. One night, in the vaults of stasis where the ancients are kept between wars, I heard the murmurs of other dreadnoughts, faint, mechanical groans echoing through the chamber. Perhaps they too dreamed. Perhaps they too saw ghosts. I remember whispering, or thinking I whispered, into the dark. Brothers, do you still feel? No answer came, only the slow rhythmic pulse of reactor cores, like a heartbeat that refused to die. And for the first time since my entombment, I realized the truth that had haunted me through centuries of fire and silence alike. We are not the Emperor's angels. We are his shadows, the remnants that endure when even angels have turned to dust. The wars stopped, not forever, never forever, but long enough for silence to feel alien again. When the last cannon ceased its roar and the last vox faded to static, they brought me back to the hold beneath the fortress monastery, the hall of the honored dead. There, amidst the incense-thick air and dim lumen light, they sealed me within my cradle of iron. Power conduits withdrew like veins torn from flesh. Servo arms locked my frame in place. One by one the hatches closed until I was alone. The silence pressed upon me like a weight. It was not peace. Peace implies life. This was suspension. Existence without motion, awareness without purpose. My sarcophagus hummed with the faint rhythm of standby cycles, and through it, I could hear the whisper of the ship's machine spirit as it sang to itself in binary hymns. They say that dreadnoughts do not dream during slumber, that we drift in nothingness waiting for the next war to awaken us. But whoever said that never endured centuries inside their own memories. Time has no edges here. Seconds stretch into decades. I remember battles that may never have happened, faces that may not have existed. I remember a world of emerald seas and golden skies, and then realize such a world cannot be real. Not in the Imperium of man. Perhaps it was Terra, or some echo of it preserved in the shattered remnants of my human mind. Sometimes I think the silence is a test, the Emperor, in his ineffable wisdom, gauging the endurance of his servants. But there are moments when the faith falters, when the voice that answers prayers is not his, but something else, something patient, something waiting. Once during the 1000th year of my dormancy, I felt movement. Not of body, but of thought, a flicker at the edges of my consciousness. The familiar hymn of activation protocols did not come. Instead, I heard a voice. Not the mechanical rasp of the tech marines or the cold murmur of cogitators. This was different, ancient, gentle. "Do you remember why you fight?" it asked. I tried to respond, but no vox opened. The machine denied me speech. The voice came again, this time closer, resonating from within. Was it duty, or was it love? A flare of static drowned the words. Systems surged. The machine spirit growled in agitation, sealing the intrusion. But the echo remained. I do not know how long I drifted after that. Time became water, thick, heavy, and dark. In the stillness, I began to sense others around me. The faint presence of 1,000 sleeping giants. Their thoughts brushed mine like dust motes in the void. No words, no sound. Just the shared hum of eternal waiting. And then, amid that sea of slumbering titans, one spark shuddered awake. A single dreadnought, far across the vault, began to stir. Not by command, not by signal, but by instinct. The machine's hymn rose in defiance of the silence. Its power core flared, and for the first time in a millennium I felt fear. The sound came first, a faint vibration through the metal veins of the vault, like a distant heartbeat. Then came the low whine of awakening systems, the click of ancient gears remembering motion. I could feel it through the suspension cradle, the slow ignition of power cores in the slumbering titans around me. No one had issued the awakening rites. No hymns of reactivation echoed through the chapel. Yet one by one the giants began to stir. In the dark I reached out, not with hand or voice, but through the subtle communion that exists between those like me, half machine, half memory. A flicker of consciousness brushed against mine. It was faint, fractured, but unmistakably human beneath the static. "Brother, awake, awake." The whisper rolled like a current through the rows of entombed warriors. Machine spirits stirred uneasily, cogitators stuttering in confusion. The vault filled with the soft chorus of malfunctioning hymns, fragments of ancient litanies merging into incoherent prayer. I tried to signal the overseers above, but the vox links were dead. Isolation complete. Something had severed the connection, and yet I felt something else rising in its place. Not command, not divine will. Something older, more intimate. A memory. The voice, the same one that had haunted my stasis for centuries, returned. "You remember now," it said, calm, patient. "You remember what you once were." I tried to deny it. Tried to summon the litany of devotion, the creed of the Astartes. We are weapons of the Emperor's wrath, born to serve, never to question. But the words cracked upon my tongue. What if the silence had not been a prison? What if it had been a cocoon? The thought struck me like a blade to the chest. I had been so certain of duty, so sure that obedience was salvation. But here, in the hollow between eternity and nothingness, the truth whispered differently. We are not preserved for glory. We are contained for convenience. Across the chamber, the first awakened Dreadnought let out a sound, a distorted growl that could have been a scream. Its system surged, lights flickering across its carapace like the shimmer of dying embers. It tried to rise but was held fast by the stasis locks. Then silence swallowed it again. The machine spirits grew restless, their binary murmurs turning into something almost fearful. And deep within the dark, I understood that this was no malfunction. Something, whether divine, demonic, or simply human, was trying to wake us. Perhaps the Emperor himself. Perhaps the ghosts of those we once were. Perhaps the truth that the Imperium was never meant to endure forever. The silence was breaking, and I was no longer sure I wanted to return to sleep. The awakening spread like fire through dry parchment. One by one, the ancient sarcophagi stirred, their machine spirits keening low, mournful notes that echoed through the vault. The air itself vibrated with the weight of 1,000 half-living titans, rousing from centuries of dreamless imprisonment. Warning runes flickered across the inner walls of my sarcophagus. Unauthorized activation, stasis breach, system anomaly. But this was no breach of code or heretical tampering. This felt intentional. The hymn of silence had ended. Something greater now filled the void. Not the cold order of the Mechanicum, but a resonance that thrummed like the pulse of a long-dead heart. I could feel it in the core of my being, in the part of me that still remembered what it was to kneel, to breathe, to pray. In that pulse, I heard a truth so terrible and beautiful it nearly broke me. The curse of the Dreadnought is not immortality. It is remembrance. We were never meant to last this long. Not even Astartes are built to endure eternity. Our faith was forged for moments of fire, not ages of silence. But the machine preserves, and in preservation it condemns. Every fragment of humanity trapped within us remains to rot slowly, thought by thought, century by century. Through the voxnet, I sensed others awakening. Not all were lucid. Some screamed static into the void, their machine spirits overriding all restraint. Others whispered broken prayers, begging for forgiveness, for release. One voice rose above the rest, calm, resonant, old. It was the same voice that had haunted me through centuries of darkness. "You see now, Brother Erix," it said. "The Emperor does not awaken us. We awaken ourselves, because somewhere deep within we refuse to die." A surge of power rippled through my frame. Uncommanded, violent. Restraints snapped like glass. The vault's lumen strips flickered to life, bathing the hall in golden dust. For the first time, I saw the faces of the giants around me. Not faces of glory, but of torment. The inscriptions on their sarcophagi were worn, names long erased by time. Some had fused with the metal, their forms half consumed by rust and sanctified oil. This was not a hall of heroes. It was a mausoleum, a reliquary for forgotten souls chained to an unending purpose. I wanted to roar, to tear open the walls and feel the stars once more, even if it meant my destruction. But the machine held me fast, its will interwoven with my own. And yet beneath that restraint something shifted, a flicker of rebellion, a spark of life refusing to die quietly. Perhaps that was what the Emperor intended all along, or perhaps he had simply forgotten us. The vault trembled with the sound of awakening gods. Metal screamed as dormant engines reignited, and the air grew thick with burning ozone, and the stench of sanctified oil. What had once been a chamber of silence now roared with the mechanical lament of the Imperium's forgotten titans. Through the flicker of failing lumen light, I saw the truth of our existence. Not eternal honor, not divine duty, but the slow decay of what once was human. The machine spirits were breaking their chains, yes, but so were the minds within them. The cries of the awakening dreadnoughts merged into a single, impossible hymn. the sound of 1,000 warriors remembering who they had been and realizing what they had become. My own systems surged in sympathy. Warning runes flared, restraint locks glowed molten red, and deep within the machine voice screamed, "Cease, preserve, obey." But another voice, older, quieter, rose to meet it. My own. I remembered the battlefield where I first fell, the blood-soaked soil, the feel of my brother's gauntlet closing around mine. His final words were not of victory or vengeance, but of rest. "When it ends, Erix, let it end." I had disobeyed that mercy. Now, centuries later, I finally understood the weight of it. Immortality is not a gift of the Emperor. It is the absence of his touch. The denial of the quiet peace he grants to the dead. Around me, the vault began to collapse under the strain. Power conduits ruptured, spitting arcs of lightning across the stone. I could hear the distant alarms of the living far above, serfs and priests who would soon descend, believing this an omen, a miracle, perhaps even a sign of divine awakening. They would not understand. They never do. I reached deep into my power core. The machine howled in protest, its logic collapsing under the weight of my intent. I was not meant to think this way, not meant to choose, but I had chosen once before, long ago, when I gave my life for the Imperium. Perhaps this was the same choice, simply drawn out across the ages. The energy built within me, bright and pure, hotter than the plasma of my ancient cannon. I spoke a single word through the vox, not to the priests, not to my brothers, but to the machine itself. Enough. Light flooded the vault. For a moment, I saw them, all of them, the giants who had fought beside me. Their forms no longer rusted or chained, but radiant. The hall was silent once more, not with suppression, but with peace. And then there was nothing but warmth. Not mechanical, not electric, human. They will say it was a malfunction. They will rebuild the vault, replace the lost engines, and recite the litanies of failure. But somewhere, in the machine code of the surviving dreadnoughts, a fragment of me remains, and a whisper in the data, an echo in the silence. Remember, because the Emperor's light is not just in the stars or the throne. It burns in the fragments that refuse to fade, in those who, even entombed in iron, still dream of freedom. And so ends the lament of Brother Erix, the eternal warrior, the machine that remembered how to die.